So tonight we are joined by facilitators Kim McCall and Ulysses Schossler. So first, just a few reminders that, again, we are recording the session for just the first part of the meeting. We'll stop the recording if we have breakout sessions or a group discussion, because we have a smaller group today, where we will share experiences. And then we'll start recording at the end when we present the technique that we will be practicing for the month and close the meeting. So just a reminder, during the meeting, you can use the raise your hand function in Zoom if you want to say something or ask a question. You can also use the chat function or simply unmute yourself and start speaking. It's very informal, and we welcome everyone to really be engaged with the facilitators tonight. So now I'd like to present our facilitators for this meeting. Kim McCall has been studying Conscientiology since 1997 and is a past volunteer of the IIPC and IAC. He is the author of the book Multidimensional Evolution and hosts a podcast by the same name. He is an anthropologist and linguist working in the field of Aboriginal land rights here in Australia. Ulysses Schossler is a psychologist who graduated from the University of São Paulo with a master's degree in contemporary integration of Latin America and currently working in the penal system of the state of Paraná. He is a volunteer and coordinator of the International Council for Neologistics and Terminology of Conscientiology. He develops research and publications on paraphenomenological methodology, cosmoconsciousness, paracognitiology, anti-imprisonment, and Guarani culture. He first made contact with the ideas of projectiology in 1984 and has been a volunteer and researcher in Conscientiology since 1988. So thank you both for being here, and I will now hand it over to you.
Sharing the screen, you can all see that?
Yep.
Okay. So, Ulysses.
Hello everyone. Good morning and good night to you. Well, we have the first session today is 280. This is the 10th section, and this is a chapter number 280. This section is about the extra-physical period of the consciousness, when everything that happens is more related to the psychosoma and to the mental soma. So the environment and the special attributes from these vehicles of the consciousness may change a lot of perceptions and the way of manifestation in the extra-physical dimension. So this first topic is the scale of observation of the projected consciousness. It refers to a different frame of perception and manifestation, where the inner references from the projector may change everything that he perceives and he deals with. So in the extra-physical dimension, your condition as an observer directly interferes with your ability to interpret paraperceptions. Therefore, you need to be aware of how you see the world. It means the way you perceive your intellect abilities, your interpretative references, how that may change. In the book, Professor Waldo, he shows a very, very interesting example. If you can observe a piece of chalk, if you are a common observer, you will only think that the piece of chalk you may use to write on a border, to write only that. But if you are a scientist, for instance, a geologist, you may think in terms of the origin of that material from the earth, the magnesium, the calcium, and things like that. If you are a chemistry, you may think about how to build that object in terms of molecular activity, reactions. And if you are a physics, you may think about the fundamental composition of the material. It is in terms of the electron and the protons and the atoms, how they function to characterize that material. So depending on your personal references, you may think, you may imagine, you may perceive different phenomena. So the very important issue here is that if you have a different reference of observation, the phenomenon may be different, even for the same object. So if you are talking with another extra-physical projector, you may have different reports for the same phenomenon, you see, for the same object, for the same fact. And that's very important. So there may be different perceptions for the same object. And that's very important for us to understand, that we may find very, very different interpretations and reports if different projectors have, in thesis, a very similar experience, you see. So any change in the scale of observation will engender different phenomena in relation to the same observing consciousness. Well, that's a very important message for us to consider, much different reports in terms of observations. So, okay. Any remark? Well, me and Ken and me, we prepared different slides, but we talked that if we want to interact, okay, Ken?
Yep. Yep, no, that's all good.
So Professor Waldo, he called our attention to a few causes that may provoke changes in our perception. Here are listed 6. The projectability, so the type or nature of lucid consciential projection. For instance, if you are projected using the psychosoma, is very different from the mental soma. If you are projected with a higher concentration of energy from your energosoma, it's also very different. So the density of your vehicle may interfere a lot. And the degree of self-lucidity in the same way. And it is possible for you, for a projector, to change the degree of self-lucidity if you use your attention and if you decide to expand, especially if you decide to expand your consciousness through any channel of perception, you may change the degree of self-lucidity. You see the extra-physical skill, the experience, and the agility of projective competence of the projected consciousness. And this topic refers to the maturity, how the projector is able to use different attributes to enhance lucidity and to deal with different aspects from the extra-physical dimension. It's also a very important factor for the projector to change the way he perceives and to get sometimes even more time to develop a better examination about what's going on. Okay, let's go ahead. And this is the next chapter. It refers to the performance of the projected consciousness and what he is able to do, what he is not able to do in the extra-physical dimension. So this is a list with 26 topics. I will not read all of them. You may find all of them in the book. I will just call your attention to a few of them, because those are performances or behaviors that you may find yourself in a special condition. And for instance, the first, the capacity to breathe. If you have not this knowledge, you may even lose your experience. If you got shocked thinking that, oh, I'm not able to breathe. In this situation, you may lose the experience and you may be pulled back to your physical body, you see? So this knowledge, this previous knowledge is important. And don't mind if you, in fact, if you lose your experience because lack of knowledge, because experience and mistakes are like that. They, something may happen at once, but then you may get experience and correct that. So study is very important for you to prepare yourself and repeat extra physical experiences. A few of those problems have already happened to me. So for instance, I remember when I tried to expand my consciousness for the first time and I got confused. I didn't know what to do. So the extra physical performance, it may have a lot of emotional consequences, and that may be difficult for you to deal with. So you are not able to breathe, really breathe with your lungs out of your body, to feel pain, you see? And the problem of illumination, there is natural illumination outside the body. You may feel really very light. You are not using your physical body. So the absence of the body weight is something impressive, very important.
Can I just like to jump in
yes.
quickly, It's just the pain factor is an interesting one, I find, because for example, I have kind of some constant pain in my ankle, in my physical body, you know, low grade, but it's always kind of there. And it is very striking. I've had noticed that a few times, being out of the body. And that's one of the things I notice is like, oh, I'm not feeling this discomfort that I'm so used to. But having said that, I also have had experiences that seemed painful, and I wonder, you know, I wonder whether that is psychological conditioning. I mean, people certainly do experience, you know, I've had like projections with like frightening ones, you know, where I was being sort of chased by intruders and stuff. And I did experience pain, but that might have been, well, I'm guessing it was psychological, you know, it reflects my psychological conditioning. So I think that's a lot of these things are kind of dependent on where we're at, right? It's not like it's always like that you don't feel pain or that you are light, because sometimes you can feel really heavy even when you're projected.
Very interesting. And Ken, do you consider that this repercussion is only psychological, or?
Well, I don't know, actually. I mean, I said that just now, but I actually don't know exactly. I would say it's like ultimately, yes, ultimately, you know, if you look at it from the perspective of the mental soma, if you can fully disconnect from, or rather fully connect to your true reality, but you know, that's a big step
Yes.
to take.
I don't know. I have an imaginary hypothesis. Maybe there should exist some kind of paraphysiological channel that gives me information from my body to my psychosoma. I really don't know. In general, we used to say that it is a psychological repercussion, like imagination, you see, but we don't know it exactly.
No, we don't.
just on that, it's interesting. I think there must be some channel that passes information from the body, because one time I was projected and I was getting pulled back to the body, but I wanted to stay where I was, and so I was trying to resist it with my willpower, but then the sensation was too strong and I got pulled back through the silver cord back to the body. And the sensation there was kind of pain. It was an extremely full bladder. I had to go in and relieve myself, and it was, so those signals from the body were definitely impacting me out of the body. But and then another time, Kim, based on your talk about the sore ankle and stuff, I had a very bad knee for a number of years, and I used to run a lot out of the body, like run and try to speed around and jump around and do all sorts of things. And then I started to limp out of the body. I wasn't able to run properly because of the pain in my knee, which I had physically, I had psychologically, I believe, conditioned myself to inhibit myself in the same way when I was running extra physically. So it was a couple of just different points there.
Well, I'd like to highlight here the number 18, paraphenomenology. That's my field of research, you see. Well, in general, people don't take the opportunity to develop other skills outside of the body. In fact, the problem of being outside of the body and not to lose experience, it's a first task. But after that, if you have the possibility to develop new skills that you were not able to carry on before, it's very important. In general, the first act outside of the body should be to expand your own consciousness. There is another chapter about the expansion of the technique of expansion of lucidity. That should be the first act for the projector outside of the body, because if you do that, you will be able to perceive many other conditions and to perform much better. If you don't do that, the performance will be obviously lower than below your capacities. So I tried that for a long time and I didn't got it because I didn't know. I didn't understand what was that to expand your consciousness. It's very simple. And you can also work out this ability in the intraphysical dimension using your perceptive and your lucidity abilities to expand your consciousness through a specific channel of perception. Okay, I will not take more time to explain this here, but I would call your attention for that. Okay. Oh, if you don't have more questions or remarks, we may go ahead. Okay. So the next chapter is about the inabilities of the projected consciousness. And here, Professor Waldo, he tries to show that there is a lot of things for the projector to learn outside of the body, in the extraphysical dimension. And in the first experiences, very probably, the projector will not succeed because of the lack of experience. And he has a very interesting statement. I wrote it down in this slide, that Professor Waldo, he didn't know so far by that time any projective genius. If you know anyone like that, please tell us, because everyone has inabilities, things to learn. So the lack of success is something expected in the extraphysical dimension, very expected. So, almost anything that you try to perform outside of the body by the first times, you may not succeed. And you need to learn about that. You need to study, and you need to read, you need to practice, you need to develop your skills for you to succeed. Okay? I think that this is the message that I got from this chapter.
I mean, I would say, you know, it's an encouraging statement, right? It's helpful to be reminded that it's something that, you know, we can all, everybody needs to learn, and we can study and so on. And at the same time, I just, you know, after all these years of myself and knowing a lot of people that have, you know, worked a long time or studied a long time in out-of-body experience, and do not have a lot of control over the experiences, don't have them at will. And then there are some people that just do, right? There are some people that can basically have a projection anytime they choose, and they have a lot of control over the experience. You know, in my research at the moment, I'm just doing some research on the sort of multidimensionality in Aboriginal culture. And I was just reading about a man today who could induce out-of-body experiences in other people. So he would take other people off on trips and wake them up out of the body and so on. So yeah, I think there are levels of this, right? There are levels of genius that doesn't mean they're perfect, but
so this is the first message, okay? There's a lot to learn, but there is another message in the next chapter. It is about what it seems to be really, oh no, we are in the same topic, yes, this is slide. Yes, we may go ahead, Jeff, Ken, please. Yeah. Well, here, Professor Waldo classified inabilities into two main kinds. The first kind, he called it universal inabilities. So things and performances that seems to be really, really difficult to perform. For instance, contacting intraphysical beings. For the lucid projector to contact intraphysical beings, another human person, see, to develop this kind of contact. The inability to affect physical objects, difficult in performing various types of reading, see, to read a book, to read a message, the act of reading, it's not easy. And another category, it is about the individual inabilities. So performances that are much more related to the subjective condition of the projector. For instance, compulsive reactions. Anyone may have singular reactions in your personal life that you may discover and you may be more aware during your extraphysical experiences. And that may help you, that may help you to know really who you are and what's going on with you when you find yourself with a reaction that calls your personal attention about you, you see? So human repressions and conditionings, difficulty in performing a critical reduction of emotionalism, your personal emotional condition, and difficulty in controlling the sexual impulse and its extraphysical repercussions. In general, that's a great difficulty for anyone to find the personal reality in terms of sexual lack. And passivity in the face of surprises or extraphysical traumas. In general, when something really scares you, it's very common that the person enters in a strong passivity in terms of behavior. And phobias or fears in general that are unfounded, weak initiatives in general, inhibitions that facilitate the retraction of the silver cord. This last topic, it's very, very common. In general, everything that is not going very well, the silver cord pulls you back, okay? So those are individual inabilities. So those two categories are very interesting. Okay, let's go ahead, please. Now that's okay. If we had later, if we understand that there is a lot of things to learn, this kind of special condition to understand that there are a few performances that really seems to be impossible, that's very important. So we may understand this to face our lack of success outside the body. So I don't know if you have any doubt, because in general, I think that this topic is very easy to understand. So it depends on our previous study to understand this topic. It seems very obvious. So if you consider the physiology of your physical body in general, nothing may work outside the body. For instance, for you to feel thirsty or to feel hungry, see, that should be a psychological effect. Okay, and also, if anyone really decides to die outside of the body, that should be impossible, even for extra physical consciousness. Okay, and I will read this last topic here. The projected intraphysical consciousness cannot take anything with him or her from the intraphysical dimension to the extraphysical dimension during the lucid projection. So this kind of transit to take something with you, it's something that so far we have no information about that. Okay.
So the Egyptian pharaohs, it was all in vain, taking all those statues and slaves and everything.
May we go ahead?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. So this is the next few slides are all about energy, and that'll be my section. And the approach I take with this is, you know, it's like I see it as we're a book club. We're reading the book. I don't know if all of you are reading it or have read it, but I'm, you know, not treating it like sort of necessarily as a like trying to cover everything that's in each of these chapters. Obviously, that would be much too much. But I was just sort of highlighting things that jump out at me, but also things that raise questions for me, or where I'm unsure, or yeah, just things, maybe things where I don't necessarily agree, or I think I don't agree, but maybe I'm not 100% sure I understand, and the topics that we can have discussions about. So yeah, immanent energy, the concept that there is this intrinsic energy that underlies all of creation, is found across cultures. And if you've looked at the book, you've seen there's almost a full page, I think, of synonyms from all across different cultures. And I know, say, working here in Australia, it's known and recognized in Aboriginal cultures. So that near universal recognition really speaks to something that is, you know, a reality that humans can perceive even before we had scientific methods or technology that might identify things like dark matter or things like that. It was something that people could perceive with their senses, with their psychic awareness, with their sensitivity to energy. Now, this next quote there, I pulled that out because this is one of those passages where I think, is it just the case? So the quote is, "It is generally accepted that immanent energy is intrinsic to the oxygen molecule, prana." So prana, the concept from Hinduism, you know, there is definitely in Hinduism, this is it is accepted, but I don't know who else accepts that. No, generally accepted by who? This is sort of a question that came up to me when I read this. And then the other thing that I pulled out is Waldo suggested that immanent energy constitutes an essential factor for the satisfactory explanation of countless occurrences. And then he lists all these different things from acupressure, acupuncture, parasurgery, teleportation. And I thought that was interesting because when I look at that, I don't immediately think of, say, teleportation or vibrational state, even voluntary self-cardiac arrest, stopping your own heartbeat. And I think immanent energy is the cause. So I think this is a really interesting launching point for our own research and for reflection. How does immanent energy, is it true, this assertion? And if it is, how is it, right? So I think that one of the things I like about the book is that it gives us so many new avenues for research. There's a lot of information, but there's also almost more questions than answers in it.
Yes, we may find a paradox here, maybe, because in terms of science, scientifically, it's very, very hard to explain that or to research, investigate the immanent energy. But for anyone, it's very easy to observe that and to feel that. And especially if you got if you have a better experience, if you are a more experienced parapsychic person, you may find a lot of consistency in this phenomenon. So this is the paradox that I would like to comment. So scientifically, it's very hard to investigate, but it's very easy for anyone to perceive it and to start developing experiences and noticing and observing all those words that Kim said about how different cultures also could observe this kind of energy.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. So this I found interesting. There's the chapter on consciential power, and what I thought was interesting is that it's put into the context of energy. So consciential power is the consciousness capacity for self-determination regarding its own life and destiny. So it really relates to our existential program, right? Pursuing our purpose of life here and moving through everyday life, making decisions about every single thing we do, right? In small decisions, big decisions. And so to have that linked in with consciential energy really highlights the importance of understanding our consciential energy and using it consciously. And I've highlighted a couple of passages that sort of jumped out at me. So this idea of the losses, right? So the failure to establish priorities makes the consciousness lose a great deal of intraconsciential energy, time, and space, repeating unnecessary actions, and enslaved by dispensable ceremonies and rituals and so on. So dispersion, consciential dispersion, arises from a lack of establishing priorities. So that's always a very useful reminder, right? How setting priorities gives our life a course. And I would suggest what arises for me out of this book, out of these passages, is that making consciential energy our priority is a good starting place, because other things flow from that. And the other thing I thought was interesting is maturity. This power grows along with the maturity of the social being, because so for me that word power in that context isn't about power over anybody or being a boss somewhere or something, but really sort of more of a hollow somatic and multidimensional sort of sense of power over your own life and the direction of your own life, and not being driven either by your own subconscious unresolved issues or by external voices and influences and judgments and so on. And certainly this idea of maturity of the social being, right? I've noticed that with aging, as I'm aging, there is this idea of power shift. There's more calm and ease within as I go through life. And that does feel like it's freeing up my energy. And I should say, if anybody ever wants to jump in at any point, make a comment or something, please feel free.
Hello, could I say something?
Sure.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, I'm not sure.
Who's talking?
This is Joe Sampson. I'm out here in Boston in the United States.
Yep.
I just wanted to add, in the Olympics, they said the oldest or the most mature athletes are the weightlifters. And the reason why is they say, according to, and this was from the Russian weightlifters, they have a stronger, more mature consciousness that believes it can lift the weights. The younger ones don't have that power. At some point at Olympic competition in weightlifting, it's more about, let's say, consciential energy is lifting the weight, not so much the physical strength. And the person who had the strongest will goes home with the championship. And this is why they're all like 35, 40 years old, because the younger men don't have that strength, mental strength that the older ones have. So the in Olympic competition, the weightlifters are always relatively older and more mature because of that power of the consciousness, let's say mental power is lifting the weight. So I just wanted to throw that in about, you know, maturity. You said it actually shows up in the Olympic weightlifting.
Even in that space. Yeah, that's a really interesting note. Yeah, thanks, Joe. So then, yeah, consciential energy is, as the definition says, the immanent energy which the consciousness uses in its general manifestations or thoughtonizations, right? So our thoughts, sentiments, and we turn that into energy, which is consciential energy. And I just, I thought it's useful to note that that term energy is used generally, right, in a sort of a loose way. It can mean a whole range of things. So if you're talking with people outside of people who, you know, maybe don't know projectiology, conscientiology, where we use energy all the time and we use it in a very particular way, other people might also use it, but they might be talking about something slightly different. So it's can be quite good to just make sure you're on the same page when you're talking about energy. So we are, as we are manifesting here in our holosoma, constant transformers of immanent energy to consciential energy. We do this through our diet, we do this through breathing, we do it through moving through spaces of immanent energy if we're in nature. We will talk in a minute about the absorption and exteriorization of energy. And this process of transformation relates to our holosomatic health, so our overall well-being. So it's useful to pay attention to it and to become more active in it, right? It's part of our nature. So it just happens, this process of creating consciential energy. But we can set intentions around it. We can become intentional with it, right? And that is part of the growth process that we work with when we study projectiology. And the other thing I found really interesting with consciential energy, and I feel that's something that's just been such a, ever since I've learned these principles, it's been an ongoing learning process, and it continues to this, you know, right now, is understanding the energetic impact that we have on each other. But so, for example, are we a drainer or a giver of energy? And we might be one in one situation and one in another. We might feel, and you know, drainers kind of sounds a bit judgy perhaps, right? Some draining energy. There are times when we need energy, when we're depleted, when we reach out to others for assistance. And then there are other times where we have abundance and energy flows naturally from us to others. And similarly, the sort of question is, what kind of people do we have in our life and why do we have them? So especially with people who are into spirituality, personal development, personal growth, and so on, there tends to be a tendency to be quite giving, to want to contribute to others, which is really an important part of our evolution. But sometimes it might mean that we perhaps support or people who are just depleted all the time and they just want energy. Perhaps we support them in ways that aren't actually that productive because we keep giving them and giving them too much. I've certainly seen that, and I've myself been in that space. And I like this quote here: consciential energy is the foundation, the instrument, the touchstone of renovation of the consciousness in its evolutionary development. However, as with everything that exists, it demands discernment in order to be used wisely, competently, and efficiently. And like I said, for me, that's an ongoing process, developing that discernment. So one of the key tools that we have to start becoming more conscious in our use of consciential energy is the mobilization of energies. And I'm just highlighting a couple of passages here. So one is how our whole body is permeated by consciential energy, as are the bodies of all living beings around us. And we interact with them consciously or unconsciously all the time. That's really our first engagement with anything around us. But it's useful to be conscious of the chakras, the reservoirs, as Waldo calls them here, and to familiarize ourselves with them, to feel them, to notice, when they are flowing or not flowing, and so on. Because having that full chakra system operating and flowing is really important to our overall holosomatic well-being. And the other point I thought was useful is to note is how the mobilization of consciential energies predisposes us to serve as a sensitive for extraphysical consciousnesses, which are technicians in all energetic operations in favor of intraphysical or extraphysical beings. So essentially, as we start working regularly with our energies, we become instruments for assistance by extraphysical consciousnesses who have a much clearer vision of what they're doing than we do. And I don't know if everybody here has done training workshops where you do move the energy in this way. I'm not going to go into it now, but I would encourage you right now, as you're listening and as we keep talking here, to actually start, if you have done this technique, if you have practiced it in any way, to actually do it now as you're sitting there listening. Because really one of the main lessons, or one of the main points that Waldo repeats in that chapter about the closed circulation, is to do it a lot and to do it in all life circumstances, right? Do it while you're in the queue, do it while you're in the shower, do it while you're sitting at your desk, do it while you're in the Projectiology book club. It's just a practice that we can do without necessarily closing our eyes and so on, just as part of our daily life. Let's keep doing that. So the reception of consciential energies technique. I actually found that chapter very interesting. I sort of just the idea of receiving consciential energies as a technique. It's essentially around the process of assimilation. It's something, for me anyway, what arose for me is that it's something that you would do that I would do in nature very, very naturally and freely, but in the context of doing it with other people, much more cautiously, and I guess usually with the purpose of, as he talks about there, assimilation, to kind of perhaps feel into another person. So if I'm working with people where I need to establish an empathetic connection or something, then I might try and sort of draw some energy in from them just for the feel of it, but it's certainly not something I would practice or I think of much as practicing as such. And there's a big emphasis in the chapter on the pathology, the potential pathology of absorption. So this process of people just absorbing energy from others, and a lot of the time it is unconscious. I mean, he says it can be intentional or unconscious on part of the receiver. As far as I can see around me, people, when I've met people in that situation, it's usually unconscious. It usually has happens in people with a big trauma background. And I've listed here, this was just something that I thought of as I was reading the chapter, is different types of people. So people who are very anxious all the time, people who are very controlling, people who are argumentative, people who are always suffering. There's always you know, some bad thing happening. It's really helpful. It's been something that's been a big thing for me recently, is to notice how I feel when I'm around that, because you know, in those states is when people unconsciously start absorbing our consciential energy. So by contrast, this technique, the absorption of extra-physical energy technique, is really an essential aspect to our well-being. And again, I actually had a question, like I sort of was curious about whether, to what extent is it fair to call this a technique? Because essentially what this chapter is about is how when we project, when we're asleep, and we project from the physical body, we're absorbing extra-physical energy. And that is the hypothesis is, or the suggestion is, that that is important to our well-being. Now, for the vast majority of us, this happens completely unconsciously. There is no awareness of the fact that we are projecting. So it's in a sense, it's like part of the paraphysiology, it seems to me, that part of our well-being, you know, we breathe, we eat, we have mini projections while we're asleep, and replenish our energy through immanent energy from the extra-physical dimension. And the other question that arose for me is the extent, how does our extra-physical environment impact the energies we absorb? So, and I think, you know, the answer is that some people end up spending a lot of time extra-physically in denser dimensions, and they might not feel very refreshed when they wake up. They don't get the benefit from that process. The other thing that just jumped out to me, and it relates a little bit to the point Ulysses made earlier about the sexual issues when you're projected, and how that can be a problem. Seems to be, and I hadn't picked this up, I don't remember this, you know, from reading this book years ago. It seems to be exacerbated in a sense. The suggestion here is that as you project, especially if you have maxi projections, your exposure to the energy increases your sexual drive and sexual desires and so on, so it can potentially cause all kinds of issues. Right. So exteriorization of consciential energies is a very practical technique. It's got many applications. Self-care. If you've had, for example, if you've been in contact with people who, or if you are in contact with people who are chronic absorbers of energy unconsciously, you can use exteriorization to uncouple yourself afterwards, or even kind of block the flow while you're in the same space of them. Spatial care, you know, essentially energetically shielding a space, or just imposing, as it were, your own holothosine on a space, and assistance to others. are all ways of using exteriorization. So this picture with the hands there, obviously that's a very common process of Reiki and so on, all kinds of hands-on healing modalities. And this is something I'd actually like to discuss maybe at the end. It comes up again in a sec. There's this discussion here, and again in the next chapter under Penta, about this 11 major therapeutic transmissions in order to preserve his or her health and well-being. And then he talks again about this number. There are only 10 transmissions because the first is almost always corresponds to a preparation or a simple energetic reception by the transmitter. And I'll jump to the next chapter because it comes into that again. So we just talked about sending energy out generally. If you make it extremely technical and deliberate, there is this Penta, the personal energetic task, which is an assistential task where you spend time every day exteriorizing energy. And I noted a couple of things there. So, I mean, if you a lot of you I know are very familiar with Penta. If you don't know about it, it is, I think, a really important piece of the tools that Conscientiology and Projectiology offer. And I definitely encourage you to go back and read this chapter or read the Penta Manual. But the point I thought was interesting, this emphasis, or the point that Waldo made, was that how generally group work has a greater assistential capacity than individual work, but Penta is kind of an exception in a sense because we're by ourselves in our space. But really, then he makes the point, we're actually not really by ourselves because there's the whole extra-physical team. So there's the individual intraphysical consciousness, but it's really the intraphysical consciousness as a conduit for the multidimensional work done by the extra-physical team. But the points that I just was sort of to raise as questions is the phenomena. He talks about a bunch of phenomena, and there's some that you know, I've certainly never experienced this. He talks about this flame, feeling of being a flame, and certain sounds that happen. And I guess one of the things that I find as a reader of the book, I wish maybe some of the things had been expressed more clearly as possible. Sometimes there are things that are stated as facts, like this is how it is, this is what will happen, when my sense is that a lot of things happen in certain ways for some people and not for others. And the other thing that that I found very intriguing, and just so, you know, I've been doing Penta for quite a few years now, and for me, it's essentially a continuous stream of energy when I'm going through that process. But Waldo, there was this other thing about the transmissions, and he's here talking again about having a series of energetic discharges that corresponds to at least 50 transmissions. And each of these transmissions is 11, I don't know, releases of energy. And so, yeah, my questions were, who defines this? Like, who defines that 50 transmissions is what's required, or that represents an energetic discharge? And yeah, that whole process, I'd be curious to hear from other Penta practitioners maybe afterwards about that aspect. And the last point, maybe, I think Ulysses, you have this as well later, but I'll just mention it briefly and then we can talk about it later. So there's a point of decalcification that Waldo talks about, I think in another chapter, but he talks about people that exteriorize a lot of energy will notice decalcification in their nails. I have for some time have had serious issues with bone density for no apparent reason, at least medically. They don't know, they can't point to anything sort of diet wise or anything else that's going on. And I have been curious, I've you know, wondered, well, what is the cause? Maybe it is something to do with energy. And so I was curious again to hear from other people that do a lot of that, whether that's something that other people have experienced as well. How are we for time? Michiko.
Yeah, Kim, sorry. So we are about a little bit over an hour into it. So maybe if we want to leave some time for discussion, we go for about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes more. Is that all right?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. That should be good. Let me just see. Yeah, so then, yeah, so I'll skip sympathetic assimilation for now, and I just wanted to just raise a couple of issues before Ulysses wraps up then. There are a few things that I'm reading, you know, when I'm reading it now that just really don't, I find it kind of, given that it's supposedly a scientific work, right? And then there are aspects in there that for me are more, well, personal opinion, really. Even this particular part here, and there was two paragraphs in these chapters that I read that deal with this crutches issue. I've just quoted one here. So he's talking about the use of, Waldo's talking about the use of I think this was about the mobilization of energy. And he says, when you use any artificial crutch, except for the impulsion of your unbreakable will, you erroneously and lazily endeavor to transfer, and so on. And this list of these words, right? Erroneously, lazily, infantile, immature, regressive, repressive, and escapist. There's just so much judgment in those, in that passage that I really found kind of find it quite difficult, because I think there's a lot of reasons why people would use things like breath, for example, in terms of moving energy. And in fact, sometimes using things like breath might enable aspects that pure sort of will-driven things don't. You know, there might be reasons why people use little reminders or post-it notes or whatever, right? All these things. So for me, this sort of language really takes away a bit from the so many powerful and useful ideas and concepts in the book.
Yeah, could I jump in here?
Yep.
Yeah, I had some conversations with Dr. Vieira about this, and I think a lot of it had to do with the time he was living. This was the time of the hippies and the crystals and all these magic powers that would be bestowed upon an individual by the, you know, quartz crystals and whatnot. And in many ways, I agree with this passage. The attitude is almost childish. It is immature. All these things, when you just deal with that small microcosm of people that I think Dr. Vieira was dealing with at that time when he started writing these passages, that whole new age sort of movement that was going on at the time Vieira was preparing this book. So I have a suspicion that these words come from his contact with that whole new age movement that was going on, especially here in America. He spent a lot of time in Miami and California, in a sense, giving lectures at bookstores. There was one in Los Angeles, a tea place or something, and he even talked to me about it. He said everyone in there was like a child, he would say. So I think that is where this passage comes from. Dealing with sort of the California crystal crowd. And, you know, he actually told me that they were like children, you know, they're all like, their attitude, let's say, is looking at the extra-physical dimension the way a child would. Anyway, so I just wanted to throw that in. That's maybe why that passage would be, let's say, overly critical than if you were sort of dealing with humanity at large. I think he was probably thinking about that whole new age California crowd when he wrote this. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. That's a really interesting perspective. And when you put it in that perspective, it makes a lot of sense, right? And I guess probably this is an interesting reminder that when you write stuff down, and you know, I know myself, like I've written things in certain contexts, and then I come back years later and I look at it and it's like, I wish I hadn't said it like that now because my perspective has changed or the context has changed. Yeah, when you write things down, they become kind of permanent, right? That's the whole point. But yeah, that's a great perspective. Thank you. And the other thing I thought was interesting.
Oh,
oh, yeah.
Sorry, Ken. I was just gonna mention, I wonder also if this is referring more to kind of more of an extreme sense in terms of when individuals use those, not individuals that just use the artifacts once or twice, but in a more extreme case where they use it as an actual crutch, they can't actually do anything. They can't perform vibrational state, for example, without this certain object. So that's maybe it's referring to that more extreme case, in which case it would, you know, be a bit of immaturity and I guess a kind of defensiveness. Yeah, even a defensiveness maybe about having to use an object or a certain tool, or else, you know, it's not possible to achieve that state.
Yeah, I would like to add that, you know, a crutch is there because you have some kind of a wound and you simply cannot do it by yourself. I can't walk, so I have a crutch to help me. So my opinion on these things about crutches is I do think Dr. Vieira does come down a little too hard on these people because a lot of them really do have issues. They are traumatized or injured in some way, and that's why they have these crutches. And sometimes I think the person might need it the same way you would need a crutch to walk. But, and this I think was Vieira's point, at some point you throw away the crutch. You don't keep it for the rest of your life. And that was what a lot of these New Age that I mentioned earlier were doing. The quartz crystal necklace was a permanent part of their life for life. It wasn't there as a temporary crutch. It becomes a permanent condition. And that's when it starts becoming regressive in many ways, because you can't move on now because I need, you know, I can't open my heart chakra unless I have my crystal here. So I have to put my crystal here every day. It's been there every day for 30 years and I'm never taking it off. It was this sort of thing, the whole idea of a crutch is something that you're going to get rid of at some point. But a lot of these individuals have absolutely no plan to ever like get rid of their quartz crystals or their crutch, let's say. And that creates the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, this whole issue, I personally like the crutches, you know, I mean, I like crystals and things like this. Sometimes I think Vieira comes a little hard. He was such an animist. He was such a promoter of the animism. Any type of crutch was something he disagreed with. And I think that was something about him personally, like he was so promoting animism that these crutches he looked down upon, let's say, or something you needed to get rid of. When personally, I like some of them. I know they're crutches, but they're still nice, crystals and such. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in, that whole idea of crutches. Sometimes people need the crutch to walk. It's not necessarily negative until you reach a point where you plan to never get rid of the crutch. You're going to keep it for the rest of your life. Anyway, so yeah, that's my take.
Thanks, Joe. Well, look, maybe we can circle back to some of this later, but let's keep going. And Ulysses, where does this keep going? Okay, here we go. Okay, Ulysses.
Let me ask you how much time I have. I'm here for you. What shall I do now?
Well,
Yeah.
Ulysses, it seems like we're having some discussion as we go along. So yeah, don't worry, just get through your slides.
Okay. Well, the next chapter is about the abuses in the use of consciential energy. And here the message is very clear that anything in nature that you may use more than balance should recommend, it will not have a very good result. And in terms of bioenergy, it is the same. So Professor Waldo wrote about a few effects that are possible for the projector to find. And as Ken said, we don't know exactly about how Professor Waldo came to those conclusions, but a few of them, if we really practice, we may find them by ourselves. For instance, if during a bioenergetic practice, if you move your body very intensely, you may suffer any kind of micro lesion or any kind of hurt. And even your muscles may be different, may be stronger if you develop exercises. And in terms of decalcifications, I suffered that by myself. You see, I used to work out a lot with extra-physical experiences. And my fingers and my nails, they suffered with that. So we don't know exactly what happens. But although Professor Waldo wrote down this observation, even if he didn't have enough scientific basis, that comes from our personal observation. In general, there is a very, very important topic. Here in the slide is a number 4. If you are dealing with your psychic abilities, you must pay a lot of attention about the negative energies that you may observe. And that's natural during assistance. But the main point is that afterward, you should apply a lot of care to clean your energosome. That's very, very important for you to clean your energies, exteriorizing energies and recovering your self-ollotocin and developing mobilization of energies. And mainly, you may be able to develop a very strong intention with your personal cosmoethics, because your personal cosmoethics is able to transform your consciential energy, and that may help you to clean your consciential energy. So diseases, disturbances, all that may happen if you assimilate a lot of energy from other consciousness. And after that, you may clean yourself. Okay, I think that we may go ahead. Well, the next chapter, it changed a lot the subject. Professor Waldo, during the next 3 chapters, he will write about the morphotocins. And in general, parapsychic people is not aware about that. It's not easy for anyone to observe your personal morphotocin, especially in terms of clairvoyance. It's not easy. It's possible, but it's not easy. It's very hard for you to see through clairvoyance your personal morphotocins. It's really not easy, okay? We may go back, please, Ken. Okay. And another observation that Professor Waldo brings us is about the power of the thought. If you have the opportunity to relax, to deeply relax and observe your thought, you will see that it's much different from the reception of telepathy. if you are able to be in a very passive mental state, you may perceive a lot of ideas crossing your mental soma. Most of them are not yours. And if you decide to produce a personal thought, you will see the difference, the power of it. So you may find this kind of experience, for instance, during hypnopompic states. If you are deeply relaxed, it's very important for everyone to discover the power of your thought, the repercussions, but even inside in your intraphysical condition, you may discover that. So we may go ahead, please. Well, here, Professor Waldo, he developed a classification between differing the detached morphotosins, those that the consciousness leaves behind, from the pursuing morphotosins, the morphotosins that remain attached to the consciousness, and the projected morphotosins, those that the consciousness throw in another direction in general. When you think about someone, when you think about a place, there is a kind of really a projected movement from your morphotosin towards that object, you see. Let's go ahead, please. Okay, and in the next, in this chapter, Professor Waldo tries to make difference between the morphotosin and the lucid projection. In most of cases, it's not difficult to observe that difference, but in some cases, it's very important, especially in terms of clairvoyance, when you are really lucid outside of your body. Sometimes the image that you see is a morphotosin. It's related specifically with another consciousness, and it may be not the natural form of that environment, but it is really attached to another consciousness. And that's very important for you to try to make differentiation, to see the power of the extraphysical consciousness or the power of any lucid projector, observing the difference from the natural image from the extraphysical dimension. So Professor Waldo lists, he wrote down many other differences, but this one, I suppose that it's very useful when you are outside of your body. Okay, let's go ahead. And finally, it's possible for anyone to improve the quality of your morphotosins and for you to be aware how do you produce them, and even to develop a personal technique. But in this way, in the book, you may find 4 main consciential attributes that may help the qualification in the creation of the morphotosins. They are the concentration, the imagination, and the power of your emotions, and the power of your will. So, especially the imagination is very important. In the book, you may find an observation that Professor Waldo wrote down about intellectual people with high level of intellectuality. This, in general, this kind of person, they don't have great ability in terms of creation and imaginations. Professor Waldo observes that women and artists, they have great capacities in terms of imagination. So imagination is very useful, and it requires discipline, and it requires also exercises for us to qualify our extra-physical production. If the lucid projector becomes aware of those possibilities in terms of assistentiality, it's very, very important, because you will be able to create assistential morphotoscenes to help other people. So it's necessary. If you don't have this resource, simply you will not be able to do anything in special situations. So the morphotoscene creation technique, I would say that it is a very qualified technique and very useful in terms of assistential necessities. Well, I think that that's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity for being here. And I wish that we have more time to continue the class today. Let's go on.
Thank you, Ulysses and Jeff. Very interesting presentation, and I think you've given us a lot of topics, good topics to discuss. Since we're, relatively small group and we have about maybe 25 minutes for a discussion, we thought instead of going into breakout rooms, we stay together as a group and just have a discussion. So I'm going to stop the recording now. And we can feel free to, to present the technique. So for this month's technique, we are going to do it's chapter 222, which is the musical physical awakening technique. So the idea is, to focus on really the practical side of projectiology, which I find when we're talking about reading the book is what stands out for me, is that you can actually not just learn the theory, but it gives you a lot of tools that you can put into practice. So the technique we'll be practicing this month, again, musical physical awakening technique for chapter 222. And it involves, before you go to sleep, you'll set an alarm clock to wake you up about 90 minutes after the time that you will probably fall asleep that night. And that time is important because it's when your consciousness is likely to be spontaneously projected, according to the technique. And you want to use an alarm that you can wake up with to soft music, so it's not a very jarring or beeping alarm if possible. And then there are other techniques that are mentioned that you could use to awake the consciousness at that precise time. But the musical alarm clock is the one mentioned in this technique because it may produce the best results. And the idea is to be able to return back to your body with a more precise recollection of the extra physical experiences that you are having, at that moment, right before you woke up. So interesting technique. I hope everyone applies it and practices it and comes to next month's meeting and we can all discuss our experiences with it. And then we would like to invite you also to next month's presentation. So let me just double check here. Next month, we will be having a presentation with João Nascimento and Silvana, who is here today with us, who joined us in today's session. So that's going to be on the 18th of June. On the extra physical period of the consciousness. So we're kind of continuing the discussion there, and it will cover chapters 299 to 326. So we look forward to seeing everybody there. Thank you, Kim and Ulysses, again for your time and energy in this workshop. It was very great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah.
See you later.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.